Good morning. It's Friday, January 30th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 846 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. All right, folks, the tension is still building. The regime in Iran has promised to strike American forces and allies across the Middle East if Donald Trump orders that attack. His armada is assembled, and according to reports last night, an aircraft typically known for carrying special forces also landed in the region. Regime thug Ali Larijani reportedly flew to Moscow hoping to get some backup from his pal Vlad Putin. Not sure what Vlad said in return. Meanwhile, Trump insists that he wants a diplomatic outcome from all of this. That may be true, but his diplomatic aspirations are backed up with a hell of a lot of firepower. Stay tuned, people. I don't know how any of this is going to end, but you better believe that I'm watching closely, and I can't wait to see what happens next. Our guest today is FDD's very own Ahmad Sharawi. Ahmad grew up in Jordan, and he studied in London Stan and then at Georgetown Stan before making his way to FDD. His main focus here is the Syria file, making him an ideal guest to help us unpack the unfolding chaos between the government of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, otherwise known as Ahmad al-Sharaa, and the Kurdish population there. It is messy, and it's really not received enough airtime here in the U.S. So we're going to fix that. Our conversation is coming your way faster than the collapse of the Assad regime in December of 2024. The European Union just designated Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. And I got to say, I'm downright giddy about it. The Euros aren't all bad as it relates to Iran. Some countries are actually quite good when it comes to putting pressure on the regime or treating it like the pariah that it is. But here's the thing. To execute this specific designation, the EU needed unanimity from its members. France and Spain were holding up the process. I don't know what happened. Maybe the slaughter of 30,000 plus Iranian protesters was finally too much. Whatever it was, the two holdouts finally relented and agreed to move forward against those nasty Rev Guards. The designation, which comes with asset freezes and travel bans, is expected to be signed, sealed, and delivered in the next few weeks. Zoom out, and the regime's legitimacy is just plummeting worldwide. The economic squeeze is only part of it. The diplomatic isolation is hitting hard, too. But if you want to know what I don't get why this took so long. The regime was the primary patron behind the war that has rocked the Middle East for the past 2+ years. Heck, the regime has been plaguing the region with terror and mayhem for 5 decades. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad it's happening, but so much time wasted, so much blood spilled, and don't get me started on the hypocrisy. Oh, one last thing. Shout out to the FDD Iran team. They've been pushing for Europeans to do this for years. Way to go, fellas. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, Turkish authorities detained 6 people suspected of spying for Iran. One of the 6 is an Iranian national. Turkey's National Intelligence Organization, or MIT, and counterterrorism police from Turkey conducted ops across 5 provinces before arresting the half-dozen suspected spooks. Ankara believes that all 6 were gathering info on sensitive sites inside Turkey, including a NATO airbase, on behalf of the IRGC, which the Europeans just designated. Thank you very much. It looks like these thugs were scouting targets in Turkey to hit in the event of a U.S. strike. Here's the shocking part. Our Hamas-sponsoring friends in Ankara just broke character and actually acted like, well, NATO allies. Amazing. Seriously. Now we wait for information to come out about these spies and what else they were up to. But just remember, folks, Iran sponsors Hamas and Hezbollah and the war that's going on. So does Turkey in both cases, Hamas and Hezbollah. And now they're fighting against the Iranians. Somebody just try to explain to me the logic of this regime. All right. Enough trying to unpack that mess. Headline 2, the Saudis are in town. This is a different mess. This delegation is led by the Crown Prince's brother, Saudi Defense Minister Khalid bin Salman, or KBS, as he's known, is on this mission. He met with U.S. officials to discuss Iran. Publicly, the Saudis want to walk Washington back from the brink with the Islamic Republic. Riyadh said earlier this week that it won't allow the U.S. to use Saudi airspace to mount that attack. Privately, I got to say, I'm not so sure. I think the Saudis are cheering on. But meanwhile, the Saudis are getting an earful from the Jewish community. Folks are wondering why the Saudi media is suddenly anti-Israel and even anti-Semitic at times. I don't know what kinds of answers they expect, but much of this stems from the growing rivalry between the Saudis and the UAE. The Saudis are doing pretty much the opposite of the UAE in every way. And the Emirates obviously enjoy warm relations with Israel. So now the Saudis are going against that 180. I don't know. It's a mess, guys. Let's hope we get a little clarity. And headline 3, South Africa is reportedly moving ahead with investigations into the naval drills that took place in early January. Just so we understand, they're investigating naval drills that they hosted themselves. You got that? So this is just embarrassing for Pretoria. South Africa hosted joint naval drills with Iran, Russia, and China off the coast of Cape Town. And that's not even the scandalous part. Of course, it is disgusting. Apparently, local news reported that the South African government convinced Iran to withdraw from the exercises altogether, knowing that Trump would lose his mind about it, and I'm pretty sure he did. Then Iranian officials were still photographed alongside participating warships. So now it's just a huge mess. It's totally confusing, and that's why South Africa is assembling a team to investigate it. Nice try, fellas. Nobody's going to buy what you put into that final report. South Africa has become a military ally of China, Iran, and Russia, sponsors of Hamas. The list goes on. But you guys, you're part of what we call the axis of aggressors. Nelson Mandela must be rolling in his grave. All right, I'm done ranting, at least for now. So let's get to this conversation with FDD senior research analyst Ahmad Sharawi. He is we like to call him our rising star, but I got to tell you something. I think he's already a star. He probably isn't rising anymore. I guess there's still more rising to do. Anyway, I digress. Let's bring him onto the show. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Ahmad Sharawi.
Thank you for having me, Doctor.
Doctor. Wow, that's an honorific that I am not used to. Okay, recent events in Syria. Tell us what the hell is going on, right? I will just say, we don't see enough of it in our media. I scan the headlines every day of all the major papers. It's not a front page thing. But we've been watching Syria go through some serious tumult. Please explain.
Sure. President Trump has signaled multiple times that he wants stability in Syria, but I'm not seeing it. All I see is conflict, bloodshed, territorial expansion, and unfortunately, a very fragile and fractured state. Just to say what happened over the past 2 weeks, we have the SDF, the Kurdish-led SDF, U.S. counterterrorism partners fought against the Islamic State along with the U.S. They controlled 30% of Syria's territory in northeastern Syria. With Sharaa coming in power, there was an agreement to integrate the SDF into the Syrian army and to include them in the political process. That was signed in March 2025. The deal was never implemented. The deadline was supposed to be December 31st. It was never implemented, whether through domestically, the two sides did not have any trust. Sharaa and his role in 2 massacres against ethnic minorities were not ready to disarm and join his army. There's also the Turkish pressure. Turkey sees the SDF as an extension, or the SDF's primary component, the YPG, the People Protections Unit, as an extension of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, which have fought against Turkey for decades. So because of Turkey's influence over Syria, over Damascus, that deal stalled. So the deal was never implemented. Sharaa chose the military option to force the Kurds back into the negotiation table and to agree to demands that that aligned with his view in terms of how the Kurds should integrate. So we've seen 3 ceasefires until now. We saw the government in Damascus expanding its territory. The SDF's territory has minimized significantly. They're now into enclaves that are Kurdish majority, but most of the territories that held the natural resources, that held the ISIS prisons, are now under the control of the Syrian government. A deal was recently announced a few hours ago. I always doubt these deals because in Syria there's a ceasefire for a ceasefire. It's always fragile, and it seems like there's disagreements right now on the implementation. So I'm not optimistic about the future.
Nor am I, and never have been when we talk about, Jolani and his background and what it meant that Syria came under control of a purportedly reformed jihadist. But I want to focus just on the Kurds for just a second, right? Whenever I talk about the Kurds, I think it's important to remind folks you're talking about, they call it a minority, right? But this is like 30 or 40 million people across the Middle East, from Turkey into Syria, into Iraq, into Iran. They span this entire area. They call it Kurdistan, but there is no such thing as a Kurdistan state, right? There are Kurdistan regions across all of the Middle East here. So you got the Kurds. They were partners, as you mentioned, to the United States in the fight against ISIS. We relied heavily on them. And they've had an area of semi-autonomy in Syria. They've defended themselves. They have fought and bled to ensure that they do not succumb to the regime of the Assad era. And they were thinking that they were going to be able to continue down this road of semi-autonomy. That has not happened. And I guess my question is, are you surprised that we have not seen a more organized response? Are they giving peace a chance? What's the logic here of the Kurds who do not trust this regime, don't want to give up the autonomy that they've fought for, and yet we're watching this kind of delicate diplomatic dance?
The problem here is, I think the SDF had the losing hand since the fall of the Assad regime. The territory they controlled was not a Kurdish majority territory, and thus you had an Arab Bedouin population that effectively mobilized against them in the recent events and took away most of the territory, along with the Syrian army, of course. But I think in terms of their ambition of establishing some sort of autonomy in the Kurdish majority areas, I think their biggest concern is the background of the new Syrian government, of their jihadi background, how they treat minorities, how they fought Jabhat al-Nusra, Shara's, Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, and the group that Sharaa led, fought against the Kurds in 2012 and 2013 and massacred a lot of them. So there's a lack of trust between them. And I think what the Kurds really care about at the moment is having their own security forces govern their areas, as in no Syrian government forces inside Kurdish areas. And apparently Sharaa is open to it. I don't believe it, because again, we've been seeing these negotiations for about a year. We can't trust him. They trusted him to include them in the political process. He didn't. They trusted him not to commit any massacres. He didn't. So there are no guarantees that Sharaa will not enter Kurdish majority areas. There are no guarantees that if he does enter, that violations and abuses will not happen against the Syrian Kurds. And let's not forget that the Syrian army itself has factions that are affiliated with Turkey, the Syrian National Army, that are sanctioned but in the US for abuses against Kurdish civilians in 2018 and 2019. So it's a very messy situation, and I understand why the Kurds are unhappy and do not trust this new government.
Right, and I guess I'm still trying to figure out whether this is like the end or just the end of the beginning. Right. I'm having a hard time understanding whether there's going to be some kind of Kurdish response. Maybe they sort of accept the terms for now, but maybe at some point regroup, because I know that they're not happy, and you get a sense that this is all simmering beneath the surface, but I don't know. But let's talk about the regime itself, right? I think they're kind of describing this as just consolidation of power, bringing stability to the region, not allowing for semi-autonomy. Is it just the raw power politics of all of this? Is that why Sharaa is doing this? Or do you think there's something more to his recent expansionist activity?
It's multiple reasons. Let's start with the internal. I think Sharaa has been pressured by the local population, let's say, at least his support base, to expand his territory into northeastern Syria, to assert state sovereignty and state control over that area. There's also an economic or resource perspective, and that is northeast Syria. the area where the SDF controlled 30% of the territory, has oil fields and a lot of resources. And so Shara wanted to put his hands on that and to start selling these for profit mainly. Third, and that's the Turkey angle. And again, as I stated earlier, Turkey has a lot of influence in Damascus. They have a lot of say in how things are governed, how they deal with other factions within Syria. And as I stated, the SDF or the Turkey sees the SDF as an extension of the PKK, and so they've been pressuring Shara to deal with them. So what Shara wants to do is gain economically, gain legitimacy within his own people, and gain Turkey's acceptance and support.
Yeah, and I think let's talk about the Turks for a minute, because I think this is important. The Turks are the primary drivers, external drivers of what goes on in this regime, right? We know it from the beginning that Erdogan kind of got his hooks into Shara. I think it was the Turks that trained and armed and prepared his army to conquer all of Syria. It all happened very quickly, as we all know. And now they're still there, right? We actually hear about people getting paid in liras. That's how salaries are, at least in some places, how they're paid. We hear about Turkish advisors, I can put that in air quotes, that are sitting in on meetings. And then we see, on top of that, we see the role of Ambassador Tom Barrack. This is the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, who seems to have a real intense interest in Syria, seems to be advocating for Turkish interests in Syria. Maybe just try to, if you can, unpack a little bit about what's going on. What is Turkey doing there? What's the role of Barrack? What's going on?
I mean, let me start with Turkey. As you correctly stated, they've been the primary backers of this new government, whether it's through military support, whether it's through having military advisors, but also having Turkish nationals as part of the Syrian army. People their primary allegiance is to the Turkish state. And I know they like to caveat it by saying these guys are Turkmen and they're not. They're ethnically Turks, but they're not. But they're Syrian citizens. But that's not what their social media says. That's not the way they speak. I mean, all they talk about is having this pan-Turkic state, which includes some parts of Syria, and it's mind-boggling that an Arab state would allow having military commanders. I mean, one of the deputy military chiefs in the Syrian army is a Turkish citizen who decided to resign after Shara decided to give the Kurds their rights. So you see Turkey's influence. They're very influential. Again, they have their proxies as division commanders in the Syrian army. They pay their salaries. They give them military equipment. So it's undeniable that Turkey has a lot of influence in Damascus. Your question about Special Envoy Ambassador Thomas Barrack. The way I see it is, after the fall of the Assad regime, President Trump posted something on Truth Social that Syria is not our business and that we will not be dealing with Syria as much as we are right now. And I started seeing this. I mean, that was true for the first few months in Trump's presidency, until the appointment of Ambassador Barrack as special envoy to Syria. We started seeing more movement towards sanctions relief without conditions, which wasn't the case in March before his appointment. We started seeing the welcoming of the new Syrian government and the international legitimacy, inviting them to the UN, inviting them to the White House. And in my honest opinion, I think it's rushed, and I think the US is being too trusting in how they deal with it, with this new government. There are, again, nothing internally they've done makes them a reliable partner. Ambassador Barrack frames the Syrian government as a counterterrorism partner, when a month ago a member of the Syrian General Security Services killed two U.S. servicemen and a civilian interpreter.
Right. And the U.S. And on top of that, we saw the release of ISIS prisoners when they went into the to the Kurdish areas. The Kurds had a bunch of these ISIS figures incarcerated, and apparently a number of them were let go by their jihadi brethren. So yeah, I don't see. I mean, I get the consolidation of power argument. That you If you've got a sovereign state, there should be sovereign control, a monopoly of arms, if you will. But I am not seeing the counterterrorism partner that I think Barak has painted the Syrian regime to be. I got to say, his role in all of this, I find very curious, but I guess we're going to keep watching. I want to ask you just a couple quick questions about Jordan while I have you. You are a native Jordanian, and they just had their Muslim Brotherhood branch hit with U.S. sanctions. What was the response in Jordan?
The response surprised me, because for a government that banned the Muslim Brotherhood 6, 7, 8 months ago, the Jordanians responded and said, in the lines of, this designation doesn't make sense because this is a banned organization. So I was really struck by the response, but this is a typical Jordanian response, trying to, but it's more of a balancing act for the domestic audience, just to signal that they're not, that they don't see the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, but as a banned political organization. In my honest opinion, the way I look at it is, I think this designation is a positive step. The Brotherhood is pro-Hamas. They've provided material support to Hamas. But I think there's more to be done. I think there's affiliates and organizations and entities that have not been covered in this designation that should be looked at, that operate in Jordan, that provide material support to Hamas. And again, I think it's a good first step, but there's more to do.
More to come, and more to come from FDD, folks. So, stay tuned. Last question for you, Ahmad. There was a security incident on the Jordanian border the other day. What happened? And I guess maybe just explain the context of all of this, because there's a little bit of a deeper story, right?
So what I heard is that there were 2 smugglers/criminals that infiltrated into Israel from the southern side of the border, and that 8 members of the Jordanian army followed them, and that's why the alarms were triggered, that 10 individuals from Jordan crossed into the border. But from the Israeli side, they confirmed that there was no terrorist or security incident, or at least a plan to commit some sort of incident. But again, as you stated, this is a signal of a bigger problem. When you look at the Jordanian-Israeli border, the longest border that Israel shares is about 300 miles. It's not completely covered. There's a lot of spots where smugglers enter, whether it's through the West Bank side or through the Israel side. We know that the Iranians have been trying to, or have succeeded in smuggling weapons into Israel and into the West Bank through Jordan. We know that criminal networks in Israel also take advantage of that of the long border, and it begs a question, and that is, what is the solution to solving this issue? Because I know now we have this semi-solution in Gaza, but the West Bank can be the West Bank the West Bank front can be triggered at any time.
Yeah,
you have
and that's exactly what the Israelis are saying, day in and day out. And they say that it's a problem of Jordanian security. They say that it's a problem of the lack of a border fence, which Israel started to build, but it will take a long time and a lot of money. But we have we've got a frontier that appears somewhat lawless right now, and that's obviously not good when we think about Israeli security, when we think about Jordanian security. I was hearing something the other day about there's actually a number of people flying into Jordan from Sana'a, which is, of course, the capital of the Houthi territory. Are the Houthis trying to get close to the border? Is that what's going on? We don't know, folks. But I would just say we're going to continue to watch that border area closely. All right, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Ahmad Sharawi, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you.
All right, we're caught up now on a couple of files that folks should be tracking, but they're pretty much not because of the whole Iran thing. But more on that soon. Meantime, here's what FTD has on tap for you today. My colleague David May writes in the Allgemeiner about how Iran's protests have once again revealed South Africa's moral rot. Pretoria portrays itself as a beacon of social justice, all while demonizing Israel at the ICJ in the wake of October 7th and the slaughter. It's also cozying up to Russia and China and issuing hollow calls for restraint and dialogue amidst the Islamic Republic's deadly crackdown. Keep an eye on this space, folks. More to come from FDD, and I suspect more to come from Donald Trump because he's not a fan of that regime there in South Africa. Neither are we. Meanwhile, FDD's Natalie Icano and Sinan Jidi have a piece in the National Review on Gaza's Board of Peace featuring the two biggest bees in my bonnet, Qatar and Turkey. The White House needs a reality check. These aren't partners. They're two-faced frenemies. There are reports that the board has been downgraded to an advisory board, which would defang these two Hamas sponsors. But I got to say, I'm still nervous about the role that Qatar and Turkey could play in post-war Gaza. Finally, be sure to check out the latest episode of FDD's The Iran Breakdown, hosted by our very own Mark Dubowitz and featuring Rich Goldberg. They talk about what's on everybody's mind. Is meaningful U.S. action on Iran coming? What's the holdup? And how much longer are we going to wait? And that is the perfect seg to wrap things up today. I'm going to be watching the news all weekend, waiting for signs of a strike. While I do that, you can feel free to catch up on all your FDD favorites, read their stuff on our website, fdd.org, catch their social media, and support everybody's work here with a very tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Monday for another episode. Will Iran be smoldering? I don't know, but we'll certainly talk about it either way. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.